morning. So we are live. Now we can start with the final September Defensio for the Synthetic Landscape Lab. We have two students graduating today, which has been supervised by myself and Maria Kapskova, with external examiner Marco Poletto. Thank a lot to the committee and guests, Melissa Sterry, researcher on BioCity, Damiano Cerrone, director of Spin Unit, Annarita Papeschi, currently researcher at the Synthetic Landscape Lab and at Bartlett UCL, Apostolos Moutsakopoulos, researcher at the Synthetic Landscape Lab. Okay, perfect. The first student is Patrick. Patrick, would you like to start and introduce yourself and the project? Thank you.
Hello together. I'm Patrick and I'm going to present my thesis project, Barranco Topographical Morphologies, and therefore I'm going to start with a quick intro video.
My project is located in Guatemala City, a place gifted with unique territorial features which are inherently connected with the city itself. With the help of topographical analysis and mapping, I will explain facts and circumstances. We live in an era where man has decisive influence on the landscape, but is not capable of colonizing it in a sustainable way. In my work, I will speculate about a new form of landscape, a landscape that lives from the city's affluence, creating a new strong correlation between urban sphere and biosphere, elaborated on the basis of topographical analysis and its manipulation.
As mentioned in the video, the base of my project lies in Guatemala City. Guatemala City is the capital of the Central American country Guatemala and is the largest urban area in the country. The city is located on a mountain valley called Valle de la Ermita in the central highlands of Guatemala and lies at around 1,500 meters above sea level, and is the largest and lowest by altitude connection between North and South Guatemala. With this strategic location, the city forms the infrastructural port of the country, as well as the political and economical center. And due to those factors, the region is experiencing a fast growth. The agglomeration, which is often equated with Guatemala City, includes several other places that have developed from smaller villages to cities in the last decades and have de facto grown together and are now forming the urban agglomeration, which inhabits the valley. The most dominant topographical feature of the Ermita Valley is the extensive canyon system that interlaces the urban fabric and from a bird's eye view appears like a green system traversing the city. The city was founded on a plateau enclosed by the canyons. The city was founded on a plateau enclosed by the canyons, with the canyons becoming its informal boundaries. And due to the ongoing growth and the difficulty of inhabiting the canyons, the urban fabric sprout on the plateaus of the canyons, covering every piece of flat land in its catchment area, resulting in today's morphology. And this demonstrates the relationship between the city and the landscape, with the landscape as a driving force for the city's form. And with this interlacing of the urban sphere and the biosphere, several problems occur, which I divided in three parts: the urban, the social, and the ecological problems. The canyons are dividing the city. They are segregating the different districts and therefore reduce urban integration, as well as they are producing a city of long ways. And in terms of social issues, the slopes of the canyons, they act as a physical border that segregates the formal city from its informal part, with the altitude as a measure of wealth. The poor and the refugees are the one being pushed into the canyons with a huge lack of infrastructure and living quality. And the canyons are as well the spaces of Guatemala City's most significant environmental problem. They are widely used for legal and illegal waste deposits, with big landfills appearing, as well as the waterways which are located in the canyons are infiltrated by vast amounts of sewage from the city, resulting in highly contaminated soil and rivers and the destruction of its ecosystem. To further understand the problem of the pollution, I analyzed the terrain for potential water runoff to see where the pollutants of the city will spread and vice versa, where the pollutants come from. As a result, the water runoff can be divided into a north and a south flow. The north flow is divided inner city, but will eventually converge again, so I didn't divide that further. The origin of the north flow is the city center, and the destination is the Montagua River Delta at the Atlantic Ocean. At the delta, there are enormous amounts of trash, and high toxic values in the water can be measured. And the main reason for this disaster lies in the biggest landfill of Central America, the Basurera da Zona 3, which is inhabiting and leveling out an entire city canyon. The south flow, in comparison, has a much shorter travel distance until its destination. Almost the whole water flow from the southern part of Guatemala City ends up in the nearby Lake Amatitlan, the fourth largest lake of Guatemala. The lake served as an important water reservoir, but today it's considered a dead one. And this is caused by the effluence of the city, which the lake is receiving via the canyon system, resulting in the lake's eutrophication and the degradation of its flora and fauna. The actual situation is that 80% of the city's wastewater infiltrates the canyon system untreated. So my idea to counteract this problem is to create a new landscape that is located on the canyon slopes and act as a cleaning landscape. In this new landscape, cleaning processes should happen with the help of living organisms that are able to digest and synthesize various materials out of the water. In traditional wastewater treatment plants, microbacteria, for example, is already playing a big role in the cleaning process. But still, there is a lot of energy needed, for example, for the oxidation process, as well as high operation and maintenance requirements. And in the case of a cleaning landscape, biological agents should overtake the act of cleaning the effluents. For example, algae, which is capable of synthesizing vast amounts of nutrient, as well as it produces oxygen, which is further needed to create a milieu microbacteria can flourish in. Or reed, which is capable of absorbing high amounts of nutrient and water from sewage sludge and transforms it into fertile soil, whereas sludge is usually dried and burned or dumped in landfills. And there are more plants and bacteria and other organisms that find a productive milieu in the human's wastewater. And most of these processes, they have in common that they are time intensive. That means still standing or slow moving water is needed so that there is enough time for the process to happen. And therefore the canyon slopes must be transformed by introducing vertically arranged basins and an infrastructure layer that distributes the water, as well as reduces the overall water flow speed. And the different basins will then be inhabited by those organisms which are suited most to the actual water composition. And with the water quality gradually changing from top to bottom, this new landscape creates new environments with an inherent correlation between altitude, water quality, and inhabitation. And yeah, this new landscape will reflect the current state of the city, since it's determined by its effluence. And this is creating a new strong correlation between the urban sphere and the biosphere. Since topography and morphology are inseparable, the transformation process must be informed by its underlying terrain. And therefore, I created an algorithmic design approach where the slope inclination is used as a driving factor for the system's morphology. I started exploring, visualizing, and manipulating different angle ranges of the inclination by decreasing and varying them as seen in this catalog. And afterwards, by overlayering those different angle ranges, a new complex topographical pattern is visualized. I further applied this new approach on different terrain resolutions, where you can see the higher the resolution of the terrain, the more complex the resulting pattern. as well as I introduced a pattern to the angle range with a rhythm, wide, narrow, which results into a pattern that is dividable in areas of the same color and edges of color change. And those two different parts of the created pattern are then treated separately in terms of transformation, with the areas becoming the basins and the edges becoming the infrastructural layer. The transformation process used for the areas of the analysis pattern is terracing to create basins which are capable of storing water. And the transformation process used for the edges of the pattern is carving. So all the areas of narrow angle ranges are carved into the terra, with the result that the terraced areas are encircled by a ditch that distributes the water between the basins. Afterwards, I run different water runoff simulations to see the changes in terms of water distribution over the terra. The location for the first implementation of this system is located at the origin of the southern water runoff of Guatemala City. That means the site is located inner city to tackle the problem of wastewater immediately where it starts. In terms of a big scale concept, the implementation starts inner city and further expands from there. And since there is almost no data on Guatemala City's sewage network, I approximated its course by mapping the city's road system onto the 3D terra and use it as a channel system. And by applying a water runoff simulation, the areas where the wastewater invades the canyons can be approximated. Afterwards, I applied the angle range pattern as a base for the transformation process and therefore transformed the landscape. This video right here shows a runoff simulation of the transformed landscape, where you can see the new distribution of the water and sewage runoff on the canyon slopes, which are now following the distribution layer and the basins. This new system, which is now located in the canyons, should overcome the problem of the bad integration of the urban fabric and the biosphere. So therefore, I speculated about how this new ecological system could merge with a city. The system will spread into the city at the points where it is first fed, beginning at the ends with the most massive outflow, then occupying other edge in the street. So this new landscape will then merge with the city, creating a new in-between where the city and the landscape becomes one. In this section drawing, you can see how the canyon's morphology could look like. Vertically arranged basins divided by the distribution channels, creating this new ecosystem.
Since Guatemala City is a politically unstable and corrupt country, big-scale projects are not likely to be executed. So I thought about a strategy how this could be possible. In recent years, there are more and more projects appearing which try to deal with the issue of the city canyon. From architecture groups to local communities which try to change the state of the barrancos. But those actions are small-scale interventions in their local communities. So how to connect those different efforts? One solution could be an online accessible open source planning tool that stores and visualizes data concerning the issue of the barrancos. By visualizing the 3D satellite data, problems can be shown by simulation, as well as you can store and visualize data for others. The different bottom-up activism groups should be able to visualize themselves in this interface and deposit data about their actions and intentions. This will lead to a new connected system which will merge their efforts and eventually leads into a transformation of their environment. Different kind of data is stored in different kind of scales to fit the visualized information. From big scale to small scale, data can be stored and visualized. different kind of data is stored in different kind of scales to fit the visualized information. From big scale to small scale, data can be stored and visualized. Since Guatemala City is a political unstable country, big-scale projects are not likely to be executed. So I thought about a strategy how this could.
Sorry for that. Yeah, and since the lack of integration between urban sphere, biosphere, and topography is one of the key points that prevent our present settlements of colonizing in a sustained way. Now, this is a proposal for an integrative landscape where ecology, topography, as well as urbanity merge together and correlate with each other and therefore benefit from each other, creating a new ecology that depends on the city and with a morphology that's highly informed by its underlying topography. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks. We can open up to comments.
I would say well done. I think your project is beautifully presented. The level of detail and the elegance of the diagrams, the diagrammatic quality of this project is impressive. I think conceptually you have picked out really one of the critical issues of the moment. Water treatment and water pollution really is the big issue, particularly of this year, but that trend, if you like, that the significance of this particular topic is very much growing. I think the quality, the conceptual approach is very much again, it's very strong, it's very much in line with where things are going. On the data, I would say diagrammatically, the creating the access to the information about the state of the city is that spot on. I think one thing that was missing is the fact that Earth systems monitoring is happening in real and near to real time. And in the presentation, you didn't convey that fact. And so I would think about that, because obviously this is a living system, and you know, particularly with water, this is going to be a very dynamic system. And so that is something, you know, this isn't just data, this is a very particular kind of data. And so, you know, were you to present this again and were you to develop this project, I would very much think about that. It's a very big plan. Now, if we were to critique it technically, there would be problems with it in terms of the fact that water treatment is it's a highly complex process, because of course the various chemical components in water are themselves, you know, they're very diverse and they present very individual problems. However, I think this project is something I can very much see this approach, not necessarily at this site, but at other sites, being integrated into the wider system of water treatment. So, for example, I'm sure in the development of this project, you will have taken a look at nanotechnology, nano water treatment. It could be, for example, that element dropped in prior, that the pollution was fed through an initial system which stripped out some of the particular chemical components that are not processable by any known ecological organism, but then the rest feeds into your system and then possibly into a third system, you know. So this is something, it's not in itself, it's such a big idea that it's not all encompassing. This isn't something that's going to fix everything, but systematically, conceptually, this is absolutely, this is, you know, very much within the way of thinking that this industry, this sector is thinking, and it is sufficiently sophisticated, sufficiently well thought out, that I do think that this is an impressive project. So, you know, normally I have a big list of critical, you know, comments to make, but really, you know, any comments that I would have, they are relatively incremental, because overall I think you've presented a very strong project.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. No, I totally agree with the comment of Melissa, and that is exactly what we were discussing with the last part of the interface, how we could work with data at different scale and make these more multiscalar and interactive. It's something that would be nice to have a step further on. But yeah, I think overall at the scale in which it operates, it has been a good effort. Other comment?
Maybe I can just follow on congratulating you. I mean, I had the chance to see your project a few months ago, and we made several comments at the time, and I am very pleased to see that you pretty much took all of them on board. To be honest, the progress you've made in the last few months is impressive. I mean, you already had good drawing techniques and beautiful drawings, but I think at the time there were several inconsistencies in terms of your ambition and what you were proposing. And I think right now you really thought them through, I feel, very carefully. And of course, given the size and ambition of the plan, we could argue that the resolution of some of the components is still quite superficial, but at the same time, I think that's also I think it's very important that you never lost the overall picture, because I think that's where the strength of the project is. And in a way, I think conceptually you could push it even a step further by recognizing that perhaps this let's say separation that you refer to between biosphere and urban sphere, it is really no longer there, and it is already no longer there in the moment you approach the project from the perspective you're doing. We could argue that in Guatemala City there is no such a thing as a biospheric let's say condition as such. Every single area is very much the product of urbanization, in a sense of being heavily influenced by the processes that the city sort of unleash on the territory. And I think what is great about your project is that rather than trying to contrast that, you sort of embrace that perspective. So, the project is not really a kind of urban regreening project as such. It's not trying to cover up with a layer of green trees, whatever is happening, but is on the contrary, kind of embracing that condition, and in a way creating a new kind of infrastructure that supposedly can be inhabited by many different creatures, and as well as technological devices which will enable, let's say, the remetabolization of this waste. And again, I think Melissa is very correct to argue that the time variable it's of essential importance here, and maybe the presentation could stress that a little bit more in terms of try to give us a sense of how time matters here, to what extent the time frame or the time variable of the process can be understood. Maybe the non-linearity of time here, the fact that it's not so much a question of phasing the project, but it's maybe a question of creating this critical mass of small interventions that at some point reach that level of networking, of interconnectedness, that eventually give them the possibility to all of a sudden reach a tipping point and become extremely effective and efficient, and lead to several more to emerge. So I feel that this is a project that would probably grow in a kind of non-linear fashion until it reaches a certain tipping point, and then really the impact of this approach would be felt and perhaps even measured and measurable. For instance, in the lake or in the delta of the river, where the sort of terminal of this large wet network are. But again, I think that what I appreciate really is your sensibility in kind of balancing the different elements of the project and sort of be consistent throughout it. And I think in the end, it was really a big step forward compared to the previous presentation I've seen, and that is really great to see. So congratulations.
Thanks.
Yeah, I also think that it's Damiano here. Yes, I also think that I have not seen the previous stages of your work, but the narrative works really well. I mean, I felt that I could follow smoothly from start to end, and everything was described in the right amount of detail so that I could kind of grasp the idea and then clearly see it through your visualizations, and then in the end really grasp the concept. So it's really positive. I think from my perspective, again, as the first comment, just one kind of incremental type of comment would simply be that, well, when you were mentioning a lot of kind of type of data and types of data, since you've been quite specific throughout your narrative, could have been maybe interesting to see, okay, what type of data you actually mean that could be kind of most kind of substantial here. But as I said, it's just some minor detail compared to the entire work. So yes, congratulations. This was really interesting.
I would just actually add something that I thought when I was watching it. This very much, the approach of this reminds me of the ancient Asian approaches to landscape management and to how to capitalize, to harness the potential of water in mountainous regions, which of course you first of all think to rice, you think to paddy fields. This has, particularly your stepped treatment system, has a feel of the paddy fields. But if you haven't already looked to Asian water systems, and how they integrate with the landscape, I think that view would be a very productive thing to do, because within the Asian historical systems, it's obviously not just the paddy fields. They then integrate that into the water treatment processes more generally, and it goes literally from the top of the mountain into the cities. And I feel that if the Asian community, particularly in Japan and China and so forth, if they saw your project, I think that this would really resonate with them. So I think you might actually find that you've got, when this is sort of put out there, as it were, I think you might find that you get some interest there. But generally speaking, this feels to me, this is something I can see your work provoking interest from industry in particular. And I can see you working very well, because it's very clear to me that the skills that you have are very strong conceptually, and your, as I said, your visualization skills are wonderful. And if you were teamed up with some others, if you were put into a transdisciplinary team, I mean, one of the communities I'm working with is one of the ex-NASA engineers, and she is actually looking, one of the big concerns we have is about nano and micro pollution flow going into the ocean. And that is a problem that's only very recently come onto the radar, because we've only very recently actually had the technical capabilities to actually trace, to identify and to trace and to get a handle on the scale of this problem. And I can very much see you working and dropping into that community, and then dropping in with, for example, one of my clients is Suez Group, which is the biggest water treatment company in Europe. I'm just doing a project with them at the moment. I can very much see this sort of being of interest to them. And I think your work very much, this is right at the heart of transdisciplinary and multidisciplinary practice. And I think you as a practitioner and a researcher should really, as you step forward in your career now, I don't know what you're planning to do next, whether you're planning to, go on through research or into industry or what it is, but I would really advise you, it speaks to me, you are one of those individuals that really has the capacity to sit in a community and to be that interface and to really help to join the dots. That is what's coming across in your project. So, I'd really think about that, because timing wise, this is perfect. But, it's very unusual that I see a project that expresses that quality in an individual.
I think that how you bring localities into the project is really important, both at the level of sensing and harvesting other type of data, as also Damiano was pointing out, but also at the level of implementation. How do you go about implementing the system through your interface and allow local condition to inform the system more at the punctual level? similar to what I suppose would happen in a pre-industrial system or ancient colonization and water system that would happen through local relationship, but then might resonate in terms of morphologies to what you are proposing. I think this is it's a crucial point, and somehow is something that we should reflect how can be evolved forward in the current condition, in which we are all working remotely, and we need actually through digital tool to be able to access this locality, things that before we were doing in a different manner through local intervention and prototype. I think this is a critical point at the moment. Other comment?
I mean, just to jump in, I think it's quite linked to what you were saying, Claudia, actually, what I meant to say. And I mean, of the whole presentation, first of all, I mean, well done. I thought it was kind of brilliant and very well narrated and represented. But in particular, I have to say the part that I kind of enjoyed the most was how you were able to unravel this relationship in between the unplanned and planned city through the evolution of the city and the morphology of the landscape. And I think that this link to the sense of scale that you gave to the project, to the ability of jumping, you know, like from the urban scale to the very large meso scale, and to give this sense of the understanding of the current situation with the water management and so on. I think that was really kind of making the whole presentation step into a very interesting level generally. But then at the same time, I saw, I mean, that's possibly my main comment in the sense of what I would do personally to kind of add more depth and layering to this, and more perhaps significance is what, you know, perhaps you haven't exactly explained or been able to render very well how is actually the system that you are proposing then reflecting and bringing back to what is the influence that it would have on the urban plan. So in this relationship in between formal and informal, by, you know, how this kind of system of new infrastructure that you have blurry perhaps the line of this new of the new city. I mean, how this would, what does it mean exactly to kind of symbiotically co-evolve this the urban and human settlement with this new management and waste management plan? So I think that would be like kind of very interesting to reflect upon and see perhaps possibility of more localized you know, settlement happening, and how the relationship is actually kind of creating that new symbiosis again.
Yeah, there is something quite unique also about Guatemala's condition, I think, you know, which is very different from what we may find in a city like London or a developed country. And you know, right now, if you look at some of these valleys, they are in fact inhabited. I mean, there are several people that live there and somehow find a way to extract value, if you want, from these landscapes. And of course, these are people that are often in extreme poverty, and they are pushed by necessity to live in such unpleasant and even unhealthy locations. But essentially, they represent a force, no? That is very much active, and in a city like Guatemala, it's a considerable percentage of the population that finds itself in that condition. So something that is also very unique here is that all of a sudden, infrastructure, it's no longer simply a kind of let's say technical apparatus that supports the city, but really becomes a part of the let's say the communal experience of the city for many people. And so there is a very unique link between these processes of recycling, remetabolizing of waste, and these, let's say, emerging urban practices. Now, I guess the key here is how do we, let's say, enable this force to effectively evolve in a sustainable, in a healthy way, because the real issue right now is that these people, you know, in order to extract value from this landscape, they effectively ruin their health or destroy their body. Like, you can't go on in a situation like this for long. So the price they pay is too high, is unacceptable. How can you introduce a system of landscape, of infrastructure, of design that essentially enable these urban practices to be, you know, to evolve and essentially become sustainable, become, you know, positive for these communities, and therefore also enriches them to the point in which they begin to be able to trade with the other communities that make up the social mix of the city, and you know, create really these kind of networks that you were sketching, and they become more and more you know, possible and efficient and effective. So in that sense, you have really created another city, another piece of city, but also another sense of urbanity that you know, slowly, exactly like you draw, you know, in your drawing, it begins to spread its tentacles, you know, like from these valleys back into the more kind of formal so-called city, and you know, and these tentacles, they are not just, let's say, you know, flow lines, but effectively they become real kind of trading lines, you know, real you know, moment of exchange between these different communities. And so in that sense, you are kind of reinventing another urbanity, starting from the trash, starting from the waste, but, you know, leading to something rather positive and exciting potentially, you know? And I think that's another element where, let's say, the human component actually that is very strong and very present there becomes kind of driving force of the project. And it's kind of enabled and channeled by your design as such, but it's very much in charge in many respects.
Yeah, if I can jump in, I also wanted to congratulate and compliment Patrick for his beautiful project and also impressive drawing techniques, which helps you to develop a proposal through the computational means. And it's impressive to see how you drive the digital algorithms through the a physical data, through the water flow analysis to make the proposal. And it's a very systematic way how you drive the whole project and how you drive all your drawing techniques. And what would be, in your opinion, the system for implementation? Now, what are the means of implementation of this kind of proposal? Because I think that, yeah, we already mentioned several times the timeline of your project. Now, how would it develop when, for example, it's getting inhabited both by human and non-human agents? No, how does it develop? But also, how do you implement it? What would be your proposal for that?
Yeah, for the, I mean, as a first limitation, it's like the satellite data you are receiving at the moment, because the project is built on like the real terrain. And if you zoom in too far, at the moment, you don't have the resolution, but in some years, I guess, you will have a really detailed terrain accessible online. And therefore, like the idea with that online planning tool can be brought further, because then you're able to map and then actually map it again with the satellites and bring it into the system, how the landscape is transforming. And then I think like also like small scale interventions from like some local groups who are actually building some houses or whatever is mapped and then integrated and then actually seen by others. And then And the other point is like, I think the lack of planning, and with like a new tool, where you are actually able to plan something also for people who are like, who usually don't have access to planning tools. I think it could be, with such a tool, it could be possible to have like a actually intervention or implementation. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that here is fundamental, the monitoring system, and monitoring system in a different scale. So as you're saying, in the scale of the human, in the scale on the landscape, no, of the maybe satellite monitoring, and also in the scale for example, your cleaning system, now that you're implementing, for example, the microalgae from the system of the 2 molecules which are actually doing the thing, you know. So the monitoring, I think that should be also happening in the different scale frame that you're proposing.
Yeah.
But that is where, you know, like following what Melissa was suggesting, you, Patrick, can come in and join the dots. I think you need to start thinking at yourself as somebody that could in fact mobilize organizations like ESA or NASA or Google to take interest in application of their technology to situations that they probably do not normally think about or not confronted to, because essentially they are driven by other industries, by other interests right now, right? So, you know, I think that's where you know, your let's say obsession or interest for design in connection with digital technologies such as the one that we are discussing now, and monitoring, remote sensing, etc., to name one, you know, could become really, you know, one of your main characteristic as a practitioner, as a designer. You know, whether you're going to research or into practice or into activism or into, you know, entrepreneurialism, you know, it's up to you depending on your inclinations. But I think the kind of ambition that you need to have, and I think that this project actually enables you to have, is this one, is to actually go and knock at the door of this type of organization and say, hey, you guys have technology, you're not using it. Potentially this could be applied in this way, and you know, I can do that, I can work on it, I can enable that, and benefit tremendously a large amount of people, and you know, generate wealth and so on. So I think that's the kind of I think this is the kind of level of ambition that I believe the Synergic Landscape Lab is trying to bring in the University of Innsbruck, but also the kind of ambition that you guys, with the kind of work you're doing, can have. And you know, it's really exciting, because this is like steering our profession in new directions which are relevant to our society today, and that are let's say relevant to several industries, touching several industries. And I think that's where you can begin to build up the next step of your career, I believe.
I'd say another thing, actually. A very timely step right now would be the fact that there are a number of fellowships. There are a number of basically third-party sponsored programs. They are sometimes just a couple of months. They are sometimes a couple of years. And the major change is that whereas, you know, a fellow used to be an individual, there's a real momentum towards collectives of individuals. And also, if you look at the briefs of a number of the fellowship and other funding proposals out there, they are very much in this systems domain. And certainly as, you know, someone really coming into the arena, I think if you have a think about, you know, actively look for the funding proposals and actively think about, you know, what you might bring to that, but actually think about some of the teams that you might bring in, because it can actually be quite challenging to bring on a major organization. You know, strictly speaking, you wouldn't really knock on NASA's door, ESA's door. What you'd actually do is you'd collaborate with an individual within that organization, or a group of individuals in that organization, and then you would develop a project together. And at your stage professionally, you'll find that there's a lot of funding applications you could apply for that you're, you know, at the level now to do. And that if you put together a strong team and a strong concept, I think you'd have a really quite a good chance of getting a fellowship. And all you really need is one or two just to give you that funding to develop your project that much more, develop your ideas that much more. And then of course what will happen is your visibility will raise, and then you can actually build out from those relationships that you've been forming through these collaborations. And that's a very practical way to do. You know, although I tend to work, you know, for a client, I'm typically commissioned for a client. Actually, I've got a couple of fellowships with young practitioners now, and it's purely because on very highly conceptual projects, it can actually, you know, it can take several months to even, you know, agree the funding parameters for a project with a major organization. But actually on a fellowship application or on one of these, you know, grant applications, you could bump in that proposal. I mean, obviously make it as good as you can, but you could bump that in, and you could have an answer within maybe as little as 4 weeks. And that for you, that's a very manageable way to do it. And there's a lot of stuff coming up in this kind of field. So if you look hard enough, you will definitely find opportunities. And obviously, as with anything else, as with awards and whatever else you do in life, don't hang your hopes on one or two, actually pluck out a handful and, you know, just hope if you get one back, you know, you've done really well. And even if you get a finalist, even if you're you know, one of the shortlisted, that's still really good. And, you know, if you do apply for a fellowship to try and develop something like this, actually go and ask for feedback, you know, go and ask that organization if you can. They don't always do this, but, you know, get some idea of why it is that they actually chose another project, not yours. But what I would say is really look to the 2021, 2022 fellowships, because actually 2020, a lot of fellowships have been very, very focused, or that, you know, there's the new stuff coming through, but this year's fellowships, for which the applications were actually generally last year or early this year, they've been very much focused on social equality, on very, you know, not on the interface of human and non-human systems. They've been very focused on trying to create cohesion between different human communities. So you might have actually found it a bit of a tougher job to try and get some funding for this year than you might for next year. So I do think about that, because that is something that literally you could go away this weekend, you could spend the weekend, you know, Googling away, finding those fellowships, get out a list, get a schedule, and then think really hard about who you might collaborate with. And, you know, it's not going to be a big lift for you to do that, because you're essentially probably going to have to put about 2-3 days into a proposal. Whereas when you're trying to pitch into these big organizations, you're looking at a lot of time, and you're looking at a lot of work, and you might be looking at a lot of meetings. So that, I would say right now, for you and your career right now, that's going to be your easier, very, very doable thing. And that might develop some exciting opportunities for you.
Very interesting. Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks. I think this, thanks a lot for the last comment, and thanks, Melissa, for pointing this out, because this is a conversation we had already with some of you last week. This is your final thesis, and it is a critical question to understand how this work that you have developed feedback in your profession. And of course, there is the option of the academia. We discussed the PhD with some of you, and there is the option of the practice. But there are, and most interesting, there are avenues that are in between that allow you to bring on research, but also to test this application quite quickly, as the one suggested by Melissa. And in my opinion, these are the best one, or the most interesting one, because allow you to keep on researching, but also to test some of the result of your research from outside of the realm of academia. So that allow you to develop what is called practice-based research, that is very much relevant at this time to also develop new practice profile, a new way of operating that don't follow the exact path that has been traced previously for practice or academia. So thanks a lot, Melissa, for this comment. And yeah, with Patrick, we will discuss more about this in the last meeting that we will have. So thanks a lot, Patrick. Congratulations for now. We have now Marcus.
Okay. So, hello, my name is Marcus Radmoser. Today I'll present my master thesis, Biodiversity, supervised by Claudia Pasquero and Maria Kupskova. I've been studying architecture for 20 years now. My studies began just as yours probably did, with hand drawings. More or less specific tasks had to be solved or represented with some static lines. The tasks were clearly limited and mostly easy for me to master. But then Claudia and Maria came up and suddenly questioned me everything. What if the lines move, merge, interact, or even communicate with the environment? Everything suddenly became really highly complex, interactive, and deeply networked for me. My previous drawing technique and algorithmic skills were no longer sufficient to recognize or solve these new possible challenges. So I started with the procedural drawing technique. Generic architecture related to highly complex issues suddenly became available and I started playing with it. These techniques enabled me to assign behaviors to lines and to connect them to each other. Algorithms such as modular multiplication, shortest walk, and the fractal growth enabled me to create design process with mutual relationships. A try for a new housing strategy with an increased density. The geometric dual partner cube, octahedron, and rhombic dodecahedron together fill every organic volume in the style of close packing of equal spheres. This was a try to volumize and merge lines in a different contrast. Flow lines from different amounts of rain, directional irritation arise and collect at different heights and slopes of the terrain. Various patterns of the channel lines and applied over large areas. The surface course of the terrain was adapted and reduced by randomly distributed objects. Later, the flow lines cover the chaotic structure with a common design characteristic. In the transition areas, the mutual relationships and influences become visible. I started drawing imaginary pics with these techniques. Up to this point, there was no active agent apart from me, but I was able to represent highly complex issues and readjust them relatively easily. This was the point where I thought, what can I do with that technique for the world? As the title suggests, the aim of my design proposal is one of the most complex issues for our time: the conservation and promotion of biological diversity. All species, including human, are affected by it. The current rate of extinction could be enough to eliminate most of the species on Earth within 100 years. The highest biodiversity is between the ecosystems, in the transition zones. In terms of design, transition design is an approach to complex and interconnected wicked problems, such as the loss of biodiversity. The causes for the loss are climate change and human activities. The consequences of this are flood and fragmentation. I know I won't solve the whole problem on my own, but I've worked on a small part of it. In my site-specific design approach, I try to research, protect, and reconnect habitats in a way that correspond to the movements and needs of wild animals. For this purpose, I'm defining 3 measures: flood protection, habitat networking, and the distribution of ecozones. Globally, the fragmentation of habitats is considered to be one of the greatest threats to biodiversity conservation. Habitat fragmentation plays the key role in extinction, especially in the valleys. Networked, coherent habitats are the basic requirements for a functioning ecosystem. I'm working on a district in the Central Alps, Salzburg, with a total area, Salzburg, with a total area of 7,000 square kilometers and an altitude difference of 3,250 meters. My first key species is the roan, the red deer, originally inhabit the forest and its edges. Most of them live in individually small groups. They are not afraid of water. If the pollution density is too high, they migrate to new areas. The deer are also successful cultural followers and cross the valleys. As a result, they encounter dangers and spatial resistance. The deer has a large habitat in Salzburg. The core habitat is located in the forest areas. Some habitats are only visited seasonally for a short period of time. And other habitats are isolated like islands and cannot be left. Many man-made structures, but also rocky areas, prevent the deer from migrating. There are high resistance barriers such as roads and total barriers such as settlements and high mountain areas. Every year, most of the deer change their habitat seasonally. They migrate from one side of the mountain to another. These crossings also play a role in the spread of plants. Seeds adhere to the fur of the animals or are eaten and normally excreted in a germinable manner. The dots show the collision hotspots of the bundled migration routes and the valley floor between the barriers. Every 7 seconds, there is an accident with wild animals in road traffic in Austria. In this simulation, the entire deer population is coming closer and takes the shortest route to the next accident point of 2018. The barriers were passed by. The most dangerous spots can be recognized by the length of the movement tails. When individuals from spatially discrete subpopulations interact, they form a metapopulation that promotes genetic diversity. I use characteristics of moss to structure the network of habitats. They don't have, but grow in a root-like patchy structure. The spore can still germinate after thousands of kilometers of flight. If the place is wet enough, a pregerm germinates. It grows in length and starts overlapping. When the protonema reaches a certain length, new buds are created. The individual actors of the entire deer population connect with the others by increasing snapping distance. If the distance is too long, lightened bridges are drawn between the barriers through the valleys. Okay. Today, the deer have to be fed in harsh winters. Their root-like catchment area grows out of each artificial feeding point. The number of individual points has been increased, thereby achieving shorter route distances. In this design algorithm, the number of individual groups was increased, and the length and straightness of the individual root-like fields were confused, so they started overlapping. The existing fragmented and therefore incoherent migration structure for the deer was gradually reconnected again. For the next step, to preserve the biodiversity, I had to zoom in. The most diverse area of the Alps is the foothill and the Montanzon. It ranges from 300 to 2,850 meters above sea level. This zone must be specially upgraded and protected. Because of the climate change, along with the growing sealing of soil, the associated natural disasters like flood have become more extreme. These pictures show the risk of flooding during heavy rain events. Centuries-old habitats can be destroyed in a few seconds. The diversive valley floor needs to be protected. To do this, I got the official data of the flood hazard areas and did a water flow analysis myself as well. In it, I found not only the dangerous areas of the valley floor, but also the places of origin and accumulation in the mountains. In the past 10 years, the Swiss alone have invested 10 billion Swiss francs in protective structures like retention basins and deepened riverbeds. For a quick automated gradation of the dams, I let the wave act along the water accumulation. Only the parameters of the height of fault and frequency of the wave had to be adjusted. The almost uninhabited side valleys now protect the highly diverse main valley floor. The terrain got modified. The water flow line has changed as a result of the retention, and therefore only very few danger spots can be seen on the valley floor. Outside of the heavy rain peak times, these retention measures are wonderful habitats for amphibians, which is the second species I had a look at. The European tree frog and the grass frog have a range of movement up to 10 kilometers. The warmth-loving species prefer to inhabit the foothill and the Montanzon. The alpine newt are inhabitants of water-rich forests and parks. Their range of movement is around 1 kilometer. Often half of the population dies during these migrations. That is why Salzburg has a law to protect these habitats. It includes moors, wet meadows, reed zones, surface-flowing water, including its dammed retention areas. It also includes the alpine wasteland, including the glaciers, but this does not affect the habitat of my chosen amphibians. This simulation shows the seasonal migration routes of the amphibians. The routes lead from the forest edges to the biotops and back again. The newly constructed dams are located in the middle of the woods and are therefore easily accessible without high resistance. This diagram shows the biotops and the range of movements. The brightest areas are the movement patterns of the alpine newt. The overlaps indicate a well-connected biotop network, but on the valley floor, the distances are too great for an exchange. So I had to take a closer look. The two large distances should be adapted with stepping stones. This can be small biotops which do not have the full function of habitats. They represent a kind of bridging. In search of new biotopes, I went two ways. In the first step, the entire area was eroded in a simulation. These deformation processes made water accumulations visible. In the next step, the entire valley floor was flooded and drained again. Delayed water release occurred in certain areas, which indicates possible retention areas. After superposing the two simulations, possible topographically and reachable locations emerged. In the final step, I had to connect the biotopes with the existing flowing water. To do this, I had to split the river lines, to split up the river. The kind of rewiring and enlargement of the entire water surface plays a major role in the European nature conservation strategy. The resulting irregularities, such as small bays and islands, create a high level of biodiversity. When designing the course of the river, I was inspired by the structure of the moss tissue again. This is an example for a splitted up river. Inspired by the moss tissue. It shows the conductive tissue with closed chambers, which in turn have closed chambers. The existing river line was divided. The new lines were irritated and the points closest to each other were merged. This created the first chambers. In order to subdivide these often large chambers, they were divided into regular intervals and then fused together. This tissue structure serves as a negative form for the modification of the original terrain. The third step, the distribution of the ecozones. The ecozone is a place where ecologies are under tension. This mainly includes stripes of hedges, forest edges, and riverbanks. This special zone between two ecosystems is species rich and has a higher biodiversity than the sum of the species that occur in the interior areas. The ecotone contains not only the species from both sides. The phenomena of increased variety of species is called the edge effect. In my proposal, I try to expand these zones. To do this, I arrange them along the habitat boundaries of forest, settlement, and biotopes. Then I superimposed the mostly linear structure with the previous steps for reconnecting and gave it a low height. In order to create a uniform urban character, I placed the design algorithm that was made at the beginning of the entire newly structured area. At the end of the day, my suggestion is to make the entire undeveloped area as a nature reserve. The architect can help make this untouched nature even more functional. If we cannot do that, I'm happy to offer my design algorithms for the localization of green bridges for wild deer and the localization of amphibian tunnels. Thank you.
Thanks, Marcus. We can open to the comment.
I'll kick off. I think your project has a number of problems. Conceptually, I think you've bitten off too much. Your intro was, you were making very basic, very well-known statements, and a lot of them, to be honest, seem rather pointless in that within the community that will be interested in this, everybody is very much aware of biodiversity loss and the general issues you were raising. And when you presented those issues at the beginning of the presentation, you were very unspecific. There were a lot of generalizations, and it felt that that was somewhat unnecessary, to be honest. It, if you like, wasted a bit of time. It would have been better in that first section if you'd have pulled out some very particular issues that you clarified in detail with percentages. Moving on, you've looked at 3 different issues essentially, but you haven't actually delved into any one of them with any depth. The strongest of your propositions is the deer proposal, and when you first started presenting that, I was hopeful that you were going to follow that through to a stage at which there was a really compelling and really interesting idea that really added something to that already very full arena intellectually, and that there are a lot of the idea of nature bridges and how you connect one community, one population, one fragment, if you like, of a set of ecosystems to another. That is a very well populated domain of research and of creative thinking and within the landscape. And you didn't really add anything to that. There wasn't anything novel. There wasn't anything particularly dynamic. The amphibian dams is a very flawed concept in that what your proposal showed is you hadn't looked at the problem of damming in the environment at a deeper level, in that dams are very problematic in that, for example, they change things like the number of insects in a region. So, for example, they can increase disease through the increase in the mosquito population. But generally speaking, the proposal that you put forward in a dynamic, in a landscape which is dynamic, in which debris falls, in which disruption, in which the flow of nutrients is actually integral to the process, the workings of ecosystems. It's how they sustain over time. You didn't interrogate that with really any depth. And actually, again, if you were essentially trying to juxtapose order, which is the dams, against the chaos, if you like, the inherent chaos or the self-organization processes within ecosystems, and that problem wasn't resolved within the proposal that you put forward. And then your third area, that was so that there was so little iteration in terms of the problem and in terms of really how you were going to resolve it, has left me a little bit lost. I was wondering, well, what exactly is this? So I think this is a project that you have taken on too much. Really, what would have been in your favor would have been to just look at one problem and really deep dive on that. With respect to the visual presentation, my sense is that you're still trying to find your visual style. Diagrammatically, your images, they're not very clear. There's a degree of, there's a lack of detail, essentially. In the first instance, there was a lot of black and white, and that made it very, very difficult to actually iterate quite what was going on in the diagram. And that was partly a problem of the scale, in that it very much seemed to me that your diagrams had been created perhaps for a big screen or a different scale to that which we're viewing today via the computer screen. So, you can have a bit of license on that, as it were, but nonetheless, it was very difficult to actually work out quite what was going on in those diagrams. And then in the second half of this presentation, then you started to introduce color diagrams, which seem to be very different stylistically in terms of, their color. The first half was black and white. So that seemed to be, there was again a lack of cohesion there, but actually those diagrams, even with the color, they lack that clarity, they lack that dynamism. I mean, the one I'm looking at right now on the screen, it's almost like a textile design. It doesn't feel like a landscape iteration to me. So I think there is a lot of work to be done, which isn't to say that I don't think there is potential in this work, but that I think you really need to think a little bit deeper about some things and not take so much on, because I think if you actually, with your visuals, if you took a step back, if you review all of your work there, I think, and if you pull out what are the strengths, what innately feels the right way for you to go, and you really work on that, I think actually, you could hugely improve the caliber of the diagrammatic presentation. But yeah, I'm not going to lie to you, it's problematic, and I think that you would need a bit of sewage to really take this to a place where, for example, if you took this out to industry and you put it down before them, you'd get that buy-in, because they will spot the very same problems that I'm saying to you now.
Okay, thank you.
Hello, congratulations to both students. Your presentation was a bit confusing, to be honest. It was partly because of the visuals, but partly because of the project seemed like it is two different projects. One was about the deers and the other one was about the amphibians. But I was wondering if there are actually some elements that you can take from the deers and apply from the amphibians and use them both to create one single project, and use actually these parameters to design, let's say, the new terrain and the new ecology, let's say, of the region in a way that benefits both of the two animals.
Marcus?
Yeah, those were, let's say, these were two strings of my proposal, the connection of the deer habitats and the connection of the amphibian habitats. But in reality, they are not in a conflict, those two connections, and they don't have a lot together. So there is no connection between the deer connection and the amphibian connection. They can use the same landscape. Especially also the human, I can implement it. He just has to treat the nature with respect and consideration. So you can overlap it and it's still functional. But these are two ways.
Yeah, I feel that, oh, sorry.
No, sorry, please go ahead, Damiano, I can wait.
Yeah, I was thinking about this, that you were saying the respect of nature, but in many ways, this is a massive activity of terraforming of the current landscape, which is, I think it's fine in an experimental way. And in a way, I started to get it like now when you started to look at kind of the last drawings. But yeah, I had the feeling as you were presenting your work that you have applied many different typologies of models and simulations. Some are about the actual kind of life of the valley and the area, and the other ones are about the actual terraforming. And I didn't see them coming together in some way, kind of in harmony. It's almost like, okay, it's kind of a set of models that are for the environment and a set of kind of for the territory. And it's terraforming, and then you have a set of models which are about the path and the movement of the animals. And I do see potentials in those. I mean, I think that, of course, I don't know the technical aspects of it. I don't know kind of how these models are built, what kind of simulations and algorithms they're using, but I see that there is a strength there. You have done a lot of work in that, and I guess that it must have been quite many hours of work to build up those models. But so I see that there is, I think there is a lot of value there. But yeah, at the end of the day, when you were presenting them, I didn't see them coming together towards a kind of a uniform kind of narrative of kind of how you bring them together.
Yeah, this honestly also thought the same, because when I started with the biodiversity and I tried to figure out some parts of the term biodiversity, I suddenly noticed that there are 1,000 strings that sometimes interact and sometimes not. And to bring this together in the project, I thought I start with 3 strings. Yeah.
Marcus, I think, I mean, just to kind of try to, I think what I see here actually, I mean, I might be a little bit dissonant on the whole, like it's, I mean, I actually appreciate the directness and the freshness that you have been kind of communicating your process. But I can see that, and I can see from all the work and from the graphics that you actually, a massive learning curve, clearly, right? I'm sure you will agree with me that you have been kind of dealing with tools and ideas, mainly with tools, particularly that you weren't used to before. And I think obviously I think this is something that we should kind of commend. But the problem with this presentation is that mainly you actually have presented a diary. Yeah, so you have actually kind of told us, I started from this point, I've done this, and that, and I try, you know, this one didn't work, then I've done that, and so on, right? While instead, I think that in the setting of your final thesis presentation, what we would have expected to see is actually a more traditional setup of a thesis, which starts, practically speaking, from identifying one problem and goes through like a sort of series of it to actually find a solution potentially, right? So it's always like, you know, always when you kind of think about how to structure your project in a thesis form, is always like what, why, and how, meaning like what are you trying, what is the issue, why is it actually relevant in the discourse, looking into that, and how actually are you doing, right? So this is not something that we have seen here, and that's why probably, and I think what I was trying to follow your narrative, I actually had issues because somehow I think everybody on this panel expectation is to kind of fall more or less back onto that structure, and this didn't happen. So if you were kind of missing a small point, then it was very difficult to follow it, and it seems like very just a pause sort of experiments without a strong linear kind of thesis statement. That's the main issue that I would see. And I think that if you go back today to your desk and you try to restructure what you've done along this line and to restructure, even just the presentation, it would be so much more stronger. So I think it's a little bit of a pity that this hasn't happened here, because personally I can see that, and that's one issue. The second issue is that I think that there is a lot of good work, but the way that it was presented again, we couldn't see really the detail. And I know it's difficult particularly now today with these settings, having like to do an online presentation to and very complex drawings, to be able to communicate them clearly is not an easy process. It takes time, and unfortunately I think the way you have done it, it doesn't really pay off. But I think vectoral form and with a lot of definition, and it would be great to kind of being able to see that detail as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would I have to sort of agree with most of these comments. I have the feeling that you have learned a lot in this journey, which is always good, and I think that I have the feeling towards the end of this journey you are actually finding a language that could be quite convincing. I mean, I have the printed book with me. By the way, thanks for sending it. And there is this image towards the end. You can see it because of the bloody background. Okay, whatever. Anyway, there is this rendering towards the end, which actually it's really beautiful, I have to say. I think that somehow you found a language there that it could be quite intriguing to push forward. In a sense, there is a sense that it's clearly digital, but has a richness and a diversity to it that I don't normally encounter in most digital models. And I think it's the results of these many iterations you went through. So I think you found something here, and I think that is of great value. Again, of course, like many of the other examiners have pointed out, I think you didn't quite manage to bring these findings back to the beginning and kind of wrap it all up in a way that sort of has the coherence that we would normally expect at this stage. So in a way, the project feels a bit like a collection of experiments rather than a coherent project. But I think to a certain extent you have to accept that. But on the other hand, I think that I still feel positive about the fact that you clearly have put the effort and you, I think, actually achieved something that, at least on the level of design, for me it's a great value. I think if you actually hang on to this and try to develop it further, it may lead you to a kind of very personal interpretation of this idea of biodiversity and a kind of richness in landscape, how the idea of biotone can be translated into a design aesthetic and strategy and technique for landscape design. I think that it could be very interesting. Also, essentially, the part that I like most about the project is when you are dealing with the bottom of the valley. This kind of a main infrastructural element, which is obviously a barrier these days, and you are somehow reshaping the river, but kind of forgetting about the roads, no? And I think the most interesting element here would be, how do you reinvent the roads, no? Or how do you reinvent, let's say, what the obsession with the vehicular traffic and mobility has brought to most of these valleys, no? Which is essentially hard boundaries, no? And the reinvention of this wet landscape of this river, it's for me very much the reinvention of the road and the vehicular system, and I think that would be an element that would be really interesting to see how you know, we could move with our bicycles, you know, new electrical vehicles, future kind of mobilities, as well as cars, if we think that cars must still be present in these kind of valleys, and even trucks or bigger vehicles which moving around goods, etc., etc. How you can reinvent mobility from an approach that is not, let's say, centered on you know, transportation, but that comes from ecosystemic considerations, no? Which in these regions have a very strong, let's say, emphasis, no? So I think again, there is a potential topic there for me very interesting, which is not quite developed here, but that somehow it's implied in my mind in these final drawings, and especially the image that I'm looking at the moment, which is on page 114, 115 of your book. Yeah, so I mean, essentially, I would try to, you know, if I was in you, I would try to kind of extrapolate these core elements, these core findings, let's say, from your thesis, and quite happily discard the rest. In a way, there is something quite liberating as a designer when you go through a million iterations, you know, different topics, different techniques, etc., etc., and then finally you land on something that feels right, that feels beautiful, that feels, you know, yours and your own. And then, you know, for a bit you can essentially let everything else go, and then, you know, structure a really beautiful, coherent thesis around those successful elements. Then in time, of course, you will be able to recuperate the other elements, because you will become more mature in terms of how you deal with your newfound techniques, and you know, through them you will begin to be able to tackle other challenges, you know, up in the valleys, the challenge of the water flooding, erosion, and so on and so forth, all these other elements that you have touched upon in the book, but at the moment feel quite incomplete, or in some cases I would agree with Melissa that, you know, this dams technique, etc., feels a little bit outdated in a way, and at odds with the kind of philosophy of your project. Although you kind of draw it in a softer way than it's normally applied, but still it kind of feels it needs some rethinking, you know? Yeah, I mean, having said that, I think there is a reason to be happy in terms of what you found, and I think you should just now try to reorganize your ideas effectively, extrapolate the good bits, and make them your central core thesis, and let's starting point for the next steps in the future.
Thanks all for the comment, and thanks Marcus for the presentation. I mean, I do agree with the comment that we made. There is a value in some of the drawing you've been developing and the technique. The question to be answered is whether you are conscious of this value and you will be able to apply it in the future or bring it forward at this moment in time, which I guess is something we will need to discuss with the committee. Some of the drawing is true, they start to have their own visual language, and they've been probably a little bit penalized, or you didn't find a way to reinterpret them in a purely virtual manner. but how do they become a project and how they enable to create a brief? This is something that maybe we should discuss forward and understand whether you have reached the maturity to do so during the committee. Overall, we had, I think, very good Defensio in September and discussion about question of synthetic landscapes. And I would like to thank all the students and Maria for working with me, Marco's external examiner, and all the guests we had today and in the past weeks that enable us and the student to complete or reach or works towards the completion of their studies and their diploma. Thanks to everybody. So if there are no final remarks. Do we have from the jury any final remarks of the day we want to close with?
I would say in both cases, they presenting, Patrick and Marcus would really benefit from building out relationships with others. In the first instance, as we discussed, that would be with members of, for example, the remote sensing community, actually looking to the wider water treatment industry, looking to other cultures. And in Marcus's case, actually, biodiversity is a hugely complex subject. You're absolutely right. And it is very difficult if you're coming in as a novice to that, or you're coming in with a very rudimentary level of understanding. And the best way for you to actually mitigate that challenge is to seek out networks, seek out relationships with they that really know these subjects well, and to listen to what they have to say. What do they think the real issues here are? What are their thoughts on what needs to be done? Really reach out, because when you do that, remember that your strengths at this moment in time lie elsewhere. You're not the ecologist, you're not the earth scientist. You are very much the you're if you like the landscape architect here. So reach out, make those relationships, and also remember, all of us, I'm sure every member of this panel has had a presentation in their life, probably a few, that hasn't gone as well as hoped. And in my experience, when that happens, it is when you're going through this period of really major development, when you are learning new skills, when you're trying to really find your way, but maybe you just haven't quite reached that point yet. But know that we've all been there, and it's not the best experience to have, but you are clearly you're going to a good place. And really work with your team at Innsbruck, and I'd also maybe reach out to other peers, reach out to others, and as you develop your work, get their feedback, because there is there are really strong points within your work. It's just you're still figuring that out. So don't be hard on yourself. Just embrace what everybody here has said and move forward. And I'm sure that a year from now, you'll be presenting some really exciting work.
Well, I believe it's also how you take seriously design in discussing some urgent ecological issue, like when the pandemic struck a few months ago. I think we were totally unprepared from a design point of view on how to respond to that. And the response has been scattered, technical, and not synergic. What design can provide is a visual and beyond visual language to synergically respond to this crisis. And the two projects of today, we could easily forecast a big flooding coming at a certain point. And so how do at that point we respond through design and through a synergic response rather than through scattered punctual solution uncoordinated? So I think it's really important to take seriously design as a language able to unify these different disciplines and make a proposal that will stand and will be strong. But in order to do so, you need to take seriously your drawing as a tool of discussing and enabling change to happen. So it's not about putting forward some scientific data that you have been reading in a paper or downloading, but it's about how do you bring them together, how they become a synergic strategy that allow us to operate in a moment of crisis. That those specific research for how in depth and good that they are alone will not be able to provide. So what is the role of design and how do we bring it forward? Seriously, I think this is a really important aspect that is across these two projects that deals with, in different way, with water systems. So,
yeah, I mean, still I have to say that if we also bring together this last two presentation with the one of a couple of weeks ago, I feel this round has shown considerable progress compared to what I've seen last years before, in terms of taking on more ambitious challenges, taking on more relevant challenges in which we are facing collectively, and so in a way also taking risks as a thesis project, like going pretty far away from what traditionally is the sort of thesis project with all its kind of classical elements and modules, and so I think that should be commended. And in general, obviously that means that there are higher risks of not achieving a kind of fully coherent project at the end, but on the other end, I think that will certainly pay off in the long terms, in terms of showing new way forwards that are absolutely necessary, I think, today for whoever is approaching the profession in this period of time. You need to be original, you need to bring innovation. Part of it, you need to look at the actual challenges of our times, and that's, I think, it's every one of you has done that, more or less successfully, but you've done it, and you work hard towards that, and I think that you need to be commended for that. And then again, take the feedbacks with you, and whether they are super good or not as super good, still they are valuable, and they will help you in the next steps.
yeah, just as a remark, I think we lost Melissa, but she pointed out during the whole conversation the opportunity that can arise through grant, the possibility to consider this project as design innovation. And this is exactly something that on the Synthetic Landscape Lab we are working on, to how do we bring forward through design innovation. And so the thesis and then later the PhD is exactly the moment where we can try to understand how design in a more specific manner can enter this realm of contribution to innovation on different levels. So already opening up this discussion, I think, was an interesting point.
Thank you very much, guys.
At some point, it will be interesting to actually think more seriously in terms of introducing, seminars or courses and programs that specifically target this question, like how you build a practice in design innovation today. I think it's something that has evolved in recent years considerably, and all the possibilities offered by digital technologies and innovation apply to the topics of ecology and ecosystemic design. I think they offer a whole range of new opportunities, but it's also a question of developing methods to reach out for these opportunities. Probably, it could be worthwhile thinking about introducing this as an actual topic in the curriculum.
Yeah, I also wanted to congratulate you guys and thank you for your work during the year. I think overall it was a great studio that we had, all the diploma from the session 1, session 2. Thank you very much for the contribution. And thank you very much for all the jury joining us today. That was a great discussion.
I just want to add a really much enjoyed the conversation. I think they were both super interesting in terms of the scale, the approaches, and the methods that they both employed. They had so much potential and to become so relevant for the urban scale. And so, I mean, I really enjoyed the conversation with all of you. So thanks for the invitation.
It's also really interesting to see how kind of these projects, they really intersect with current questions in the industries and also our challenges with climate change. So I found it very, very interesting also their potential societal impact that they could have in both cases. Pleasure to be here.
Thanks a lot. Thanks, Damiano, thanks Anarita and Apostolos and all the other. Melissa just said that she had a problem with the connection. And we will be back in contact with the students soon. See you all online or in person very soon. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
See you soon.
Bye.
Bye everyone.